It's been a very informative session. I'm really happy to be here. I'm going to start with a very brief overview, kind of snapshot of the asphalt industry in the U.S. I think it's useful to share this. We have about 3,700 asphalt plants across the country that in 2021 produced over 400 million tons of asphalt mix with an average RAP content of just about 22%. The vast, like most the countries we've seen, the vast majority of that recovered asphalt is recycled back into new mixes. So in the fall of 2020, NAPA's board of directors asked us to put together a task force to develop long-range goals for the industry around sustainability and resilience. That task force started to meet. We quickly narrowed the focus from sustainability and resilience to really narrowed in on greenhouse gas emissions. We spent the bulk of 2021 meeting about every 2 weeks for an hour and a half, which is a big ask for a lot of the folks that are on this task force, to put together this set of goals for the industry. What we came up with was the road forward, which is the overall ambition or goals for the industry to achieve net zero emissions. Now, I want to mention the vision here is sustainable communities and commerce connected by net zero carbon emission asphalt pavements. And our mission through this program is to engage, educate, and empower the U.S. asphalt community to construct and produce net zero carbon emission asphalt pavements. There's one word here that I want to focus on, and that's the word community and the mission. It's not the industry, it's the community, because we rely a lot on the specifications provided by our customers, our upstream suppliers. They're all part of this, and outside organizations. So this approach is really four-pronged strategic direction, strategic goals. The first one would be from a simple industry perspective, our scope 1 emissions, production and construction of asphalt mixes. Things like renewable fuels and alternative fuels, warm mix asphalt, being more efficient in our trucking or transportation, capital improvements to our asphalt plants to improve energy efficiency, and that sort of thing. The second area is looking downstream at our customers and the use of that pavement in terms of making long-lived pavement designs like perpetual pavements, improving the rolling resistance of pavements through smoothness, and contract incentives that allow us to be more nimble and more innovative and reduce emissions. The third component of this is looking upstream at our suppliers. This is through the use of recycled materials, things like balanced mix design that will let us be more innovative in our mix design approaches and the types of materials that we can use in asphalt mixtures. So looking upstream at our supply chain is a really important component. The fourth piece is looking at our scope 2 emissions, which is the electricity, right? How can we incentivize asphalt plants to purchase clean electricity? How can they reduce their energy intensity through energy efficiency? And as we electrify some of the processes at asphalt plants and in paving construction, we need to make sure that we're pulling from a clean electrical grid. Now, the last piece in here, which isn't really a fourth, it's not a fifth, it's kind of like a sidecar, is carbon offsets. There's a lot of controversy out there in the media about the veracity and validity of carbon offsets, and we wanted to leave this as a last resort. We want to focus on our own industry, upstream and downstream, to see what we can do to decarbonize, and carbon offsets are really just not a focus of what we're looking at, but we did want to make sure it was addressed. So how are we advancing this program? This was launched in February of 2022, so it's been about a year and a half. So what have we been doing? First of all, there's a lot of cost in developing programs to educate the industry, to conduct research, and I'd like to acknowledge the companies on this slide who have contributed financially and with their in-kind contributions over time to sign on as partners with this group. You'll see some big brand names here that you probably recognize. You'll see some small companies you probably have never heard of that might only own a handful of asphalt plants, but they're all committed to join us in this effort. We've launched a number of educational initiatives. Pave It Black is our podcast series, and season 5 focused on this effort. Last year we launched a webinar series called The Road to Zero, which continues this year as well. We put out operational tips and case studies. We just in the last month or two published this report, Production Strategies for Saving Money and Reducing Emissions, which draws on some of our earlier reports over the last 15 years or so. And then we have this emissions inventory report that we published last year, and I'm going to spend just a few minutes going over what that emissions inventory looks like. So we took data from the entire industry and looked at emissions trends over the years 2009 to 2019. And I swear we did not coordinate with the French groups in picking 2019 as our year. Just so happens to be the same year. The black line here represents the emissions intensity, kilograms of CO2 per short ton of mix, a range of 49 to 52 or so. Now, per metric ton, you would add a couple of kilograms to that, basically. And what you'll see is our emissions intensity went down kind of in the early 2010s or so, and then it went back up. And we haven't really moved the needle on the emissions intensity. The bar graphs here are the industry's total emissions. The blue represents the upstream emission materials, yellow is transportation, and green on the top is mixed production at the plant. And what you'll see is over this period, total emissions have gone up. We need them to go down. So how do we do that? That's the big question that we're facing. We're moving in the wrong direction, and that's a real challenge. So we looked at some scenarios. This is really similar to what you saw earlier with what France is looking at. We looked at what if we can increase our RAP content from 21% in 2019 to about 40% in the long-term range. And we did not put dates on this. We didn't want to constrain ourselves to dates, but we just wanted to kind of look at a long-term approach. What if we could increase the amount of natural gas we use in our asphalt plants from about 70% to about 90%? Now this is simple stuff. This isn't looking at biofuels and that sort of thing, but just using more natural gas as a fuel. Reducing the average aggregate moisture content of your aggregates, right, by about 1%, by covering your stockpiles, paving under your stockpiles, sloping that area, that sort of thing. Adopting warm mix asphalt technologies, and across the board an average reduction of about 40 degrees Fahrenheit in temperature. That corresponds to a little under 25 degrees Celsius. So it's not the most ambitious, but this is kind of an industry-wide average approach. And then reducing the electricity intensity by about 20%. So these are the 5 kind of components of our easily adaptable existing technologies. It didn't require innovation. It just requires more of the will to do it, if nothing else. And pretty much all of these are going to be cost saving as well. So you're going to reduce emissions and cost. And what we found was that in the long-term scenario, we can reduce emissions by about 24%. Now this is pretty significant, showing that you can reduce cost and reduce emissions by about 24% with existing technologies. So how do we get beyond that? That's the real question. How do we get beyond that 24%? So the first step is like adopting all of these technologies and practices. The next step is what's next. So the first thing we had to do is think about what tools are we giving to our industry to help them understand where they are. And the primary tool we're relying on is our EPD program. So we're the program operator. We manage the product category rules for the environmental product declarations, and we have the Emerald Eco-Label software, which lets the mix producers very easily and cost-effectively develop EPDs for their individual mixes. So that's a really important piece of giving control to the mix producers so they know where they stand today and what they can do to reduce emissions, but based on changes in their plant, based on changes in their mix designs, based on changes in how they're sourcing their materials, what kind of transportation modes, and that sort of thing. What we've seen in the last year and a half is a significant increase in the number of mix producers who are developing and publishing EPDs. So March of 2022, that was 5 years into this program, we only had 18 plants with published EPDs out of 3,700. We were 5 years into this program, only in 6 states. Now, I looked at this about a month ago at the very end of August when I actually put these slides together because they wanted them early. We had 200 plants with published EPDs across 36 states, and that number grows every week. So we're seeing a very significant increase. Now there's another 150 plants that have started developing EPDs but haven't published them yet. So combined, that's about 350 plants. We're at about 10% of the industry, which I think is we're right getting past that initial, what would you call it, early adopter phase, right? So we're moving into a phase where we expect lots and lots of mixed producers to start developing their EPDs. Last summer in July, we had a Road Forward Summit, and we spent a day and a half working with our partners and some other folks, trying to establish, what are we looking at over the next several years. I'll summarize this, and we looked in each of those key areas: production, supply chain, downstream at our customers. Look at the things in the bottom in red. Look for opportunities. Our industry tends to look at greenhouse gas emissions issues as sort of a threat or an unknown. But anytime you see change in the business environment, there's opportunity. So we want to focus on where are the opportunities to provide value to our customers, to increase our profitability as an industry, that sort of thing. Maintain optimism. We have a very steep learning curve ahead of us over the next several decades. But this is something we can accomplish. We have to be optimistic if we're going to get to this net zero by 2050. We have a ton of these infographics that were illustrated in real time while we were presenting, and I'm happy to share those with you if you're interested. Just look me up after this session. The last thing I want to mention here is we are planning an international conference on net zero asphalt pavements in 2025. So it's the kind of natural next step to this workshop, is that we can all get together somewhere in the US, we haven't figured out where or when, but those information will be coming. But think about this, we can all get together for a couple of days and start to work through on an international basis, how do we achieve these goals? The last and final thing I want to mention, I'll be giving a similar presentation but more focused on EPDs at a workshop on Thursday related to airfield pavements. So I'd encourage you folks to come and take a look at that. Thank you.
Any questions?
Great presentation. Does it work? Yes. Great presentation. I loved it. Wonderful. A quick question on the EPD. So you showed how the implementation and how many there are now. So how did that happen? Because I know that there's been the FHWA climate challenge supporting it. So can you tell us a little bit more how it happened?
Yeah, we spent about 5 years, like I said, telling the industry, hey, you guys need to start developing EPDs. This is going to be something that your customers are going to be asking for. And it kind of fell on deaf ears. And then what happened was we saw clear direction from the federal government. They launched a Buy Clean task force at the Office of the White House to put together almost all the federal agencies to focus on developing Buy Clean policies. And then, since then, about a year ago, when Congress passed the Inflation Reduction Act, That provides several $1 billion in funding to state, local, and federal agencies to procure low carbon construction materials. And that's going to be based on what's reported in the EPDs. So that huge tranche of funding became available, and we made it very clear. We brought in federal agencies to our annual meeting and that sort of thing to explain what's going on. Now that funding hasn't been released yet. We're expecting those grants to start coming online next year, but it's going to really change the environment. We've also seen some states that have passed either through legislative or executive orders buy clean policies that are affecting all the contractors in those states. And those have just started to come online this year in Colorado, for example, but we're seeing the next year or two, Oregon, Minnesota, New York, Delaware, more and more states that are going down this road. Yeah.
Thank you.
More comments, questions?
I do want to comment on something. Something that I always praise about the US is how they set up a group of people to develop the product category rules for environmental product declarations. It was a very extremely efficient group composed from people from the Federal Highways Administration, the different departments of transportation, industry, of course, universities. So it was an excellent group. I would say it was a privilege for me to also be part of it as an external expert, I would say, from Europe. In Europe, we have been struggling a lot to have a document like that, the PCR for the asphalt mixes. And this is something that I always envy from how you did it, and actually you deliver an excellent document as well. That is an example for us as well. And since then, the document was published in like 1-2 years ago, if I remember well. And since then, I'm glad to see that this huge implementation came after, and so I think this is very important. That it's not just worked on just for the sake of it. It's actually that the industry is getting benefit out of it. That's very important. And one problem that we are foreseeing here is that when the manufacturers have to do an EPD, in an ideal world, you will have all the primary data from all your material suppliers. So you need to know the environmental impacts of the bitumen that you are putting in your mix, the aggregates and additives and so. So in an ideal world, as I said, all of them will supply an EPD to the asphalt plant. I think for the aggregate case, it's something that could come, or is already more or less almost there. For bitumen, maybe a bit more difficult. Maybe we will have to wait a bit more. And for additives, I think it's almost, I don't know if impossible, but we will have to wait a few years more. So since the publication of the PCR, are you working with the supply chain, maybe something to promote this kind of, also creating all the PCRs for these raw materials, or how to get good primary data, good quality data for EPDs of asphalt?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's a big challenge because there's not a lot of good data, especially for additives. Our binder and aggregates data is aggregated across the whole country, so you don't have supply chain specific information. So one of the things we're doing is planting seeds in some of the PCR committees for other materials. So I'm personally participating in the PCR committee for asphalt binder. So in the next year or so, we should see that come to fruition and start getting EPDs from terminals and refineries. That'll be a huge step. Some of our PCR committee members from our PCR for asphalt mix also participated in the revision of the aggregates PCR to kind of make sure that there's consistency, and that's really helpful. The other thing that we're doing is we've got a draft that we've put out for public comment. We're going to be revising over the next few months of guidance to upstream suppliers. So if you're an additive manufacturer, or if you're making some other, your trade association associated with emulsions or some other input ingredient, that we have guidance, very simple. We're dealing with companies that really don't even know how to spell EPD, right? And so we need to bring them along and say, this is what you're gonna have to do. And then there's also interest in developing a PCR for additives. That's gonna be a very complex process. but there's an association of modified asphalt producers that's taking the lead on that, and we're participating in that effort as well. So it's a really coordinated effort to try to get the whole supply chain, reporting the same information based on the same methodologies, based on the same assumptions, and the same upstream data sets. There's a lot of challenges, but I think we can get there.
Excellent. So thank you very much, Joseph, for your presentation.
So now